Hello, and welcome to this video on developing queries and reports in the Slate Technolutions software. I put this together because I haven't really found anything or seen anything that's comprehensive and would give you a demo video for someone who's just getting started in Slate on running queries and reports. Unlike most CRMs used by colleges, Slate doesn't come pre-packaged with queries and reports, but it does come with a nice set of tools that will allow you to get pretty complex even without the ability to write SQL statements. Slate makes it very simple to pull records from a source, narrow down your results set to very specific data, and order and filter your record set and data so that it can be adapted to almost any situation or question you need to answer or analyze. You'll start at the Slate icon for queries and reports. The main difference is basically that a query will retrieve a list of records. For example, a list of mailing addresses or phone numbers. Reports, on the other hand, will aggregate the data. So it'll give you total numbers and the ability to write formulas and calculate that data. A report on decision totals and admit rates by academic program, for example. In this, I'll talk about queries first and then jump into reports. You can jump ahead using the links below in the description, but I do recommend getting a good handle on queries before jumping into reports. Now, a new query will allow you to create and save it, while a quick query is something you need on the fly and you don't intend to keep it. Slate will store it for 24 hours in a temp folder unless you save a copy of it for longer term storage and use. So we'll click on New Query, and first you have to give it a name. The user is going to be yourself by default as its creator. You can choose to share this query with others who also have permission to write queries, and choose a folder here to store it. By default, a local is selected as the type of query. Now, under type, you can also choose a library of templates, or you can choose configurable joins, where you need to select data points from different tables or bases in Slate. But for this, let's just choose the local for this exercise. And then you have to choose a base, where you need the data to come from. Now, each of these on a list allows you to select data from a different table or base in Slate. I'll go over several of these. So let's start with forms and events. Forms events pulls data from the Slate calendar. For instance, you need a list of every event you did in a specific postal code or between a set of dates. Or maybe you need events between a specific time, like give me a list of every event I did for the past 2 weeks after 5 p.m. It can even give you registration and attendance counts. It's not going to tell you anything about the registrants or attendance. It's not going to give you student data, but it will give you a total count. This is different than the last one down here on the list, form and event registrations. This base is going to point to a specific form you've created, like let's say an inquiry form on your website, or a specific event, like your open house event on August 15th last year. And then it will give you student record data associated with that form or that event, such as their names, school, academic interests, other interactions, anything associated with that form or event, as opposed to just the event data, the date, time, title, template, and so on. Interactions pulls student record data in the context of interactions. For example, you need a list of every student who received a phone call about your open house event, or every student who registered or didn't register for that open house event and their phone numbers, and so on. Or it can be very specific, like every student who lives within a 10-mile radius of your open house event who is over the age of 18 and interested in art history. Interactions will pull student record data, and it can be filtered by different types of interactions, such as event registrations and other interactions in their timelines. Next, message inbox. So this will also pull student record data, but in the context of the Slate email inbox. This can be useful, for instance, if you need every student record who sent us an email over the past week, and that email was resolved or hasn't been resolved by a specific date or a specific person. And it can be very specific, like every student from Botswana who emailed within the past 6 months and visited our webpage on testing requirements, but is within a specific test score range because you need their phone numbers. You want to launch an SMS text campaign, or you want to call them, or you need their addresses to send them something about a testing policy update. It can be very as specific as that. This is similar to the next one, messages, right here. But messages, instead of Slate inbox, the source is your deliver email and SMS marketing campaigns. Now, prospects including opt-outs, applicants, prospects and applicants, all pulling student record data and really depend on what you're looking for. So I may use prospects here if I'm just pulling records for students who have not yet applied and I only need data related to a prospective student, or vice versa. I just need applicants, students who've applied, and data related to their application, so I'll choose applicants. Or maybe I need both. Maybe I need both types of information. I'm going to go with prospects and applicants. If you need, for instance, let's say a list of prospects from a specific school or a combination of schools who were sourced from a particular vendor or service, and connect that with application history, you'd want to go with prospects and applicants. Next is organizations. So that source is from Slate org records. So it's data about specific schools or organizations with Slate records. And then you have organization contacts, and those are that's the specific contact data you have at those orgs, the contact people you have at those orgs. So for instance, if you need a list of, let's say, all two-year colleges that you're visiting over the next month, and you want to know the total number of prospective students at each one of those organizations or each one of those schools, you would use the organizations base. Now let's say you need a list of contact people at each of those schools that you're visiting. That would be organization contacts. So let's just practice with one of these. But first, before you choose a base and before you even get into queries, you really need to state the purpose for your query and state that in natural language. So before you click on new query, it's really helpful to articulate in natural language what it is that the query is going to do. And here's a hypothetical just for our practice. This query will retrieve a list of incoming admitted students, either studying or interested in engineering, so that we can call them about a new math enrichment program in Georgia over the summer. And the program has capacity for 50 to 60 students. All right, this one provides a good hypothetical for practice. So I've got to determine three things. I got to identify the base, the exports, and the filters. First, the base. From what table will the data be retrieved? In this case, applications, because I'm looking at admitted incoming students. So this is the application space, and I don't need prospective student information. Next, what exports should be selected? For this scenario, we do need their name and their phone number, of course, because we're calling them. But other info like academic program, events they've attended, other interactions they've had with us, and so on, that could all be helpful for this conversation in good context. So I want to export that data as well. And then finally, we want to limit our data set based on filters. So who will we include or exclude from this list? In this case, we want to include students from Georgia. That's where this program is taking place. We want admitted students. We want them coming in next fall. We want an engineering student, or we said students interested in engineering. So in this case, I'm going to go with undecided students, but students who have visited our engineering website over the past 90 days. What we don't want, we want to exclude students who are not in a particular math score, because those students may not be interested in a math enrichment program. And we don't want more than 60 students. The capacity of this program is not more than 60 students. So we've got that determined. And I make a new query. Click on New Query here, and I give it a name. I'm sharing it with others. I select a folder. It's local, and the base is applications. And I hit save. And here we go. First, what exports do we want to select? Remember, we wanted their name and their phone number and some other contextual data about the students that might be helpful for our conversation. So I'm going to click over here on export. And right away, I'm going to choose the first name and their last name. Notice right here, I can pin these exports for quick access when I make future queries, so they'll always be up here at the top. Commonly used exports can be pinned. But right away, I'm going to choose first name and last name. Next, I'm going to need to do some searching. So I search for, right here, I search for phone number, and I find this device mobile phone number 1. So I'm going to choose that. I may look for a home or evening phone or parent phone number 2 in case I need it. Everything else I need to search for it in here. If I want academic program, events they've attended, interactions with us, and so on. You've got to search by keyword to find that export. Now, if you search for an export and you can't find it in here, it just means that it's probably an export that you don't have and you need to create it in Slate, and that it's data point that has to be added to the record, whether that's an org record or a student record or event record. And maybe it even needs to be mapped to an external student information system and pulled into Slate. Now, if you're following along in Slate right now, you may want to pause the video here and complete this step and choose your exports. But when I'm ready, I click Continue. And here they are, my exports. Now, notice one of my exports has a warning here in red. This was my events export. I wanted to see all the events that each student may have registered or attended for as a talking point during this phone conversation, and it needs a configuration, and it tells me that here. So I'm going to double click on that warning. And what I need to do here is choose from which from which folder or folders I want to retrieve. So for example, maybe I just want to see students who've registered or attended engineering seminars, or maybe I just choose all the folders. I want to see all events they've attended. I can filter this too. So maybe I want to say registrations that are not more than 30 days old. Keep the info fresh and current. We'll talk about filters next, but for now, I'm just going to choose my event folders, click Save, and I'm ready. Now, next, I don't really like how some of these exports are named, so we can give them an alias to make them a bit more pleasing to the user. For example, I might change device mobile phone number 1 to something simpler like mobile number. You can do this either by clicking on the name of the export or clicking over here, rename exports. And you can give them all an alias that may read and look better. Now let's move down the page to filters. You see right now with no filters in my applications base, to limit my results set, I have almost 700,000 matching records in the application space, and we want to include and exclude certain records. So I'm going to reference back to this again. Remember we talked about filters. We wanted to include and exclude certain students. So let's add those to filters. So I'm going to click on filter here, and I search for them. So first I search for state. I find mailing address state. I may also include school state, and I click on continue. And then it's going to ask me for which state. So I'm going to choose Georgia. And then I'm going to hit Save and New. And notice before I do that, I've already limited this down to 6,500 records. A lot better than 700,000. So I hit Save and New because I'm going to add a couple more filters. And I'm just going to show you a few of these for demonstration. You remember I wanted engineering students. So I'm going to find the college, and I'm going to choose this, college. Click continue, and I'm going to choose engineering, and then I'll hit save and new because I want to show you just one more of these. Ping, P-I-N-G. So this will give me students who visited our engineering website, because I also wanted those students who may be interested in engineering. I can do this by a specific URL on my website. I can do a ping count, and a ping count by URL, so how many times they visited that URL, and how long they were on the site. I can do duration. I've got a lot of choices here. Maybe I only want to talk to students who spent more than 3 minutes on that website. You can filter that out here. I'm going to go ahead and choose this one, ping count by URL and timestamp, and I'll click continue. And I'm going to set it. So here I have operators or modifiers. Count. Count is a comparison modifier here. So I'm going to go with greater than or equal to. I'm going to choose that one. 1. So at least one visit to the website, one or more visits to the website, greater than or equal to. And I specify the URL. And then I'll use simple arithmetic here, today minus 90. So I only want to look at visits over the past 90 days, until today. And the word today is fine, because you can write today and Slate will know you want the current date, the date you're running the query, whenever that is, today or in the future. So we'll look at today's date, subtract 90 as the start date, 90 days, up until the current date. Let's move ahead. So I've got all my filters here, but I needed to arrange them in a logical order. These three here are constant. Address in Georgia. They're an incoming admitted student for the next term. And I wanted an admissions high school GPA of less than 3.2. So that's going to apply to all of my records. But down here in parentheses, I can use a local operator, the OR, right there, the OR statement. This creates what's called Boolean logic. So what I'm looking for here is an engineering student or an undecided student who has visited the engineering website over the past 90 days. And I got that OR statement right over here. You can just drag it right in there. And of course I surround it with these parentheses. I can also use the not operator to say exclude under any circumstance any record that has X. So I could say not any student who has attended our engineering seminar last week that was talking about this math program, because they already know about it, for example. So these are your filters. Experiment with it, trial and error. You'll get frustrated and repeat the process over again. It really doesn't take long to master this. And in this case, I wanted no more than 60 students. And you can see here my matching rows, I now have 53. So I'm good. But the thing next, what I'd probably want to do is check my logic. So you see the check logic here. Let's say I know for sure that a particular student, let's call her Takia Smith. I know that Takia Smith should be one of these 53 students, so I click Check Logic. I find her record, I run it against the logic, and yes, overall it checks out, and I got green check marks all around. If any of these were red, an X mark, I can go back and look at that filter and see, okay, what went wrong there? Why didn't Takia Smith qualify under that particular filter? Last but not least, I want to sort my data. So I could sort it alphabetically by last name, or maybe I want the oldest admission decision to come first on top of the list. You can even have a multi-layered sort. So I click here and I choose how to sort the data however I need it. Scroll down and my filters are good, and here I'm sorting by decision date, and I'm doing this in ascending order, so the oldest first, the oldest decisions first, and I can double click ascending to change that and make it descending and so on. So my query is ready, and if I want to turn this query into a call form allowing callers to fetch records from a batch, I can do that under Edit Properties and configure that. Now I can choose to share it with certain people or certain roles, permission roles. I can preview the results. I can look at the SQL statement. I can even save a copy if I need another copy of it. But let's just go back to the query here. So I'm going to click on this link to go back to the query. And I can run my query to see my record set, which will be displayed down here. Now, I'm not going to show you any data, but this is where you would see it. But you do have options for the output. This can be, for example, an Excel spreadsheet. Being careful, of course, with sensitive personal data, but you may need this to import it into like another secure system. Batch management can also be useful as well. So for instance, I can choose field here, and I can replace a certain field for all of these records. So let's say all of these records, student records, have a field that says qualifies for summer enrichment program equals false or no, and I want to replace that field value with true or yes. I can do that with all in one batch with batch management here. You can generate pins, you can add interactions to the records, you can even retroactively refresh all these records, maybe due to a rule change in Slate. Or you can mark a special tag to their records, like summer program tag. You can be really dangerous with this here too, so use batch management with caution. Okay, so now we'll move on to reports. If you've got a good command of exports, filters, and sorts and queries, you're ready to dive into reports. And I won't revisit all of that here, but I'll take you through Slate report architecture, which is actually really quite simple. A new report, of course, it needs a name. You can add it to a folder. You can optionally change its orientation and its colors and its parameters if you desire. But once we save this, and we'll call this one an enrollment data report, and we have a blank screen here with some buttons. The edit button lets you change the name of the report, and you can even edit it so that you can set it up to email certain people on certain days and times of the week. For instance, I have a report that emails certain lead team members a preview of tomorrow's event schedule, every afternoon, and they review it for accuracy, something like that. You can also edit notes. It's very good practice to do that. You may want to include a narrative on what this report is, what questions it may answer, its purpose, and any other context that would help someone else better understand it. You can copy this report. Maybe it's a template and you're going to use it to create other reports. And you can specify who has permission to view and or edit this report. Now, reports are made up of individual parts. Each part, like queries, pulls data from a source or base, and each part can either be an aggregate of that data with tables and charts right here, or it can be a query with a list of records and details. For example, I may have one part with admit totals and yield rates using data and charts, and another part that is a query list of, let's say, admit records who attended open house with mailing addresses and phone numbers. You can have as many parts of this report as needed, and you sometimes may want to break up your data into separate parts so that this report will take less time to return a data set. If you ask one part to do too much, it can even time out and totally give up on you. I'm just going to create one part for this demo, and I'm going to click here. I'm going to use the data charts, and I'm going to give this a name. Maybe I'll call it admit and yield, and then I'll choose a base, and in this case I'm going to use it applications because I'm just going to be looking at applicant data. And then I'm going to click save, and right away it's going to ask me to filter this down, filter the result set for this part, because whatever filters I choose here will impact the entire part, this entire part of the report. This is critical because the application base, as you can see, for example, here is looking at almost 200,000 records, and that's going to really slow down the data result. I only needed to look at specific records, so I need to click here and add filters right away to this entire part. So here's an example. I filtered this to include decisions, admit decisions in the coming round or term with an application rank of 1, meaning it's the primary application. I want to say not any test records that I may have in the system. So that brings it down to almost 7,000 records. So that's a lot better. And then I click save. So I've got my filters for this part. Now I need to add columns and rows to this report, just like it were an Excel spreadsheet. Columns can have additional filters, and like admits only, confirmations only, and it can have formulas like this one, yield rate, and or enrollment melt, et cetera, et cetera. So those are your columns. Then you have rows. And those rows can be anything from this stuff down here. It can be a data table, it can be a chart, it can be a section title or a header row, or you can put static content. Maybe you want a whole paragraph about what this data means and explain it. You can also put a page break. So if you create a PDF out of this, it's going to break that page. And those rows can have filters as well, additional filters. So let's create our columns. We'll start with columns, and I'll click on data column here. And maybe I'll call this one admits, and I can have additional filters in this column. Although in this first column, I don't need any filters because if this is looking at admits, the entire part is filtered down to just admits. I already did that. So maybe I want, but maybe I want to add something like I only want to see engineering admits for this column or something. But I do want to give it a variable name. A variable name is going to be required if you're going to add this column to a formula. Like, let's say I want to divide admits and confirmations or deposits to calculate a yield rate. It must have a variable name for that formula to work. And that variable has to start with the @ mark. So in this case, I'll call it @admits. And they give you an example here in Slate. I'll click save. Oh, but before I do that, you can also create what's called a column group. This is actually quite nice for some reports. So maybe I want to call this group of columns yield data and another group of columns enrollment data. You can also specify how wide you want this column to be, and you state that in a percentage. So I click Save, and I have my first column here, admits. And remember, I didn't put any filters in that column because they're already right here. It's going to be looking at all of that, admits. But now I want to create a second column. So I'm going to click here again to create another column. And this time I'm going to call it confirmations. So let's say these are confirmations or enrollment deposits. And I give this a variable name again because I'm using it in my formula later at confirmations. And I do want to filter this data, filter this column. I just want students who've paid an enrollment deposit, so I'm going to add that filter to this. So now I have my confirmations and my admits, 2 columns. I want a third column though. I'm going to click data column. Now this one's going to be a formula. I'm going to call it yield. This is the yield rate. And I'm going to change the type of column to formula. And I need to write that formula down here using those variable names. So this is at confirmations divided by at admits. Now I need this null if. They give you an example down here and they explain it. If the denominator might equal 0, you got to include the null if function to prevent a divide by 0 error. So it's at confirmations, my variable there, divided by null if at admits, comma, 0. I also want to format the number. So this is a yield rate. So I'm going to add a decimal point and a percent sign because I want this to come out as a percentage with 1 decimal point. Now I'm going to click Save. So now I have my 3 columns. I have my admits, my confirmations, and my yield rate, which is a formula. And now I need to create rows. These are the columns. Now I have to create my rows. I'm going to start with a simple data table row. Just going to add a data table here. Give the row a heading name. You can also have different row type options that you can try out depending on how you want to display the data. So group by, that will give totals by a single group, and it's the default. Now aggregate will let you specify a group and then choose specific values for that group by an average or a sum or standard deviation, variance, and so on. One example is number of emails and average response time to those emails. Distribution can show data in a continuous or discrete ascending or descending type order. And then, like columns, the row can also be a formula. You can also add exports to these rows, and this is optional. But for example, I may want each row type to export by college or by academic college, and then also by race ethnicity. You can have multiple exports allowing you in the report to click and expand each row to drill down and see specific data sets in multiple rows, like an accordion. I'm not going to put any additional filters here, but that can be done as well if needed. And I'll click Save. So here we go, my row. Now remember, I clicked Export to export by college, and race and ethnicity as well, and it's behind that data. But this is going to give me admit totals, confirmation totals, and yield rate for each of these colleges that I'm exporting. Now, if I want to see the final result, I'm going to click here to see the report. If I want to edit and add more parts, I'm going to click Edit Part. But I'm going to click on that enrollment data link to see the report. And it looks like this. And remember, I was exporting by college and I had race ethnicity behind that. So when I click on a row, I see that here. So that concludes this demo. You may want to check out some other tools in Slate reports over here, like Widgets right there, which allows you to put very simple data points on the Slate homepage. So when you log into Slate, it's the first thing you see. You can also do predictions, Slate predictions, which can be used to analyze what data points have statistical significance to come up with enrollment probability metrics for student records. And then there's Slate Voyager, which is pretty cool. It's data visualization. It plots data points on a world map or just a US map to see the data geographically. And I'll conclude with, practice is key with all of this. You're not going to break anything in Slate by creating queries and reports, but you may get frustrated. Feel free to refer back to this video if it's helpful. Jump around in the table of contents down there in the description. Feel free to give me a like, and feel free to post any comments or questions you may have in the comments section below as well. I wish you the best, and I hope to see you out there someday when it's safe to be out there again someday. Thank you.